21-year-old.
Yeah, there's a lot of sketchy stuff happening in Georgia.
It's under the age of 12.
Yeah.
So, 2 consecutive prison sentences. Sure. Probably a family member. Oh, he gets pleaded guilty.
Okay, I want to welcome everyone to the Bidders Conference for the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act. This is to discuss Section 231 and 225 funds. If you're in the wrong room, I can help try to direct you to the right room. But welcome today. This is being recorded. We do have 3 other guests on the phone. And I ask that if you're in person, please silence your phones. We will be planning to post these slides and the recordings by February 25th for your records. All information, including the frequently asked questions, so your questions that you asked today, the responses to those questions, will all be posted on the department's website. So you should be familiar with where this is at. This is where the bidder's application is posted at as well. So adult education and under grant opportunities. Okay. So can everyone hear us okay on the phone?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, great. We'll just do a quick round of introductions, just so that for our records, we know who's being represented in the room, who's shown interest in the grant. So if you just share your name and what organization you're here for or in behalf of. We'll start with we'll start with the state staff. My name's Alex Harris, State Director for Adult Education, and in the back of the room, Teresa. Okay, great. And I know that Mike Williams will probably be in a little bit. He had a 10 o'clock that was starting. Let's start at this table here.
Mariah Oliver, Northwest Iowa Community College.
Sarah Breams DeCavers, Northwest Iowa Community College.
Pamela Woolridge, Western Iowa Tech. Lily Castro, Western Iowa Tech. Claire Rickelbacker, Eastern Iowa Community College. Jennifer Schuler, Eastern Iowa Community College.
Beth Schneider, Eastern Iowa. Dave Carson, Eastern Iowa Community College.
Ashley Richmond, Indiana Community College.
Joe Bjornstad, Iowa Lakes Community College. Steve McCauley, Iowa Lakes Community College.
Giselle Agan, Chatham, Northeast Iowa Community College. Patty Mendoza, Iowa Valley Community College District.
Eric Sundermeyer, Des Moines Area Community College.
Libby Woods, Iowa Western. Darla Holmes, Southwestern Community College. Jen Mulch, Southeastern Community College. Martha Bell, Southeastern Community College. Brenda Kemper, Southeastern. Ian Diggs, Hawkeye Community College. Laura Heidelbaum, Hawkeye.
James High.
Erin Limon, Iowa Central. Susan Doyle, Iowa Central Community College.
Okay. Anyone on the phone, could you please introduce yourself as well?
This is Julie Albert from Western Iowa Tech.
Hi, this is Carla Andorf from Kirkwood.
Hi, Constance Graham and Heather Schrock from Hawkeye Community College.
Terry Reinhardt from Kirkwood.
Nancy Davis and Billy Bellows from Western Iowa Tech.
Okay, thank you very much. Today's objectives. For some of you that are familiar with adult education and the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, this might be an overview. However, it's important that any applicants, any bidders are familiar with the process, familiar with the obligations that this grant imposes. So we'll be doing a brief background and purpose. We'll also talk about applicant eligibility, the eligible services, proposed submission requirements, the project itself. And all of this, the grant dropped on Friday. You would have had an opportunity to look at that. Feel free to ask questions at any time. If I pause before responding to that question, it's only because I'm trying to capture that to see if that's something necessary to go into FAQ or if this recording answering is sufficient for that. We're also going to be going over the Iowa grants process of how to submit that application so that there's no bugs or last minute things that we might need to cover on that. We're very open that if there's a technical assistance training that we need to offer for those that are new to it, if you're having grant writers that are maybe for the first time using Iowa grants and need to be associated with adult education, we're happy to help with that. We're also going to be going over once you're awarded, what does that look like? So the accountability, the performance requirements associated with receiving the funding from the feds. And again, any questions and answers at the last session, if you have them, you're holding on to them and we didn't cover them, we'll feel free to ask for that. Okay. Just to be clear that this competition is being offered in the most direct and equitable way possible. This last year, we were audited by the feds for our competition process. So they're involved in reviewing this application prior to us releasing it to make sure that we've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. So if some of this seems a little bit over the top, it's only because I don't want to get in trouble. You don't want to get in trouble. We want to make sure that we're providing this competition in the most fair way so that there's no gap in our services and that we've met all of our federal obligations for managing this grant. So you probably noticed that the grant packet is a little bit different than last time. I did take a look at that, a hard look at that, provided some overhauling so that we can be as clear as possible in that process. Okay. We are making sure that the same information that all of our current providers are getting is the same information that all of our potential applicants would be receiving. So that's why today's bidders conference wasn't an RSVP, wasn't an invite. It was based upon, since it's not a mandatory meeting, an opportunity to come in and listen to this information. Okay, any questions? So today we're going to be covering Section 231 of Adult Education and Family Literacy and Section 225, which is Corrections and Institutionalized Individuals. So those are the two funding streams that we're going to be covering today. There will be a break for lunch about noon. I'm not going to keep you here till 2 without feed. Well, I can't feed you, but I'm giving you access to go get food at least, even though it is very cold. Might want to pool resources and have something delivered, that's fine. This room is reserved until after 2, okay? I don't want to spend a lot of time reading to you, but I won't go too far off script, only because, again, as I stated, it's to be equitable, to be fair in the competition. This is the information that you need. Our priorities for funding are those that have demonstrated effectiveness in improving the literacy of eligible individuals. With respect to those that have barriers to employment. So those barriers to employment are those with low levels of literacy, those that are unemployed, those that have cultural barriers, those that are first-time, single parents. So there's a long list of those with barriers to employment that Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act defines. Your ability to serve those as an applicant is what we're looking for. We also want to make sure that those services that are being proposed are aligned with the local workforce development areas. So because adult education is one of the 4 titles in the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, we want to make sure that the efforts that you're providing are in harmony and aligned with the efforts that Title I Adult, Title I Youth, Voc Rehab are providing, so that we're leveraging as much support as possible to serve those in need. Lastly, our priority for funding are those is whether or not your application is responsive to the needs, as I mentioned, of those with barriers to employment. So how responsive are you to those needs? How adaptive are you? How flexible are you in your application to serve such a diverse population that is our target population? We want you to be aware of important information and resources that as an applicant, you should know the law. So the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, Title II. In particular, you should know EDGAR, that's related to our financial uniform guidance. You should also know Iowa Administrative Code, chapters 23 and chapters 32. So those are important information that will help in the grounding of your application to make sure that you're following the regulations associated with this grant. You should also be familiar with Iowa's Unified State Plan, because again, the work that we drive at the state level is linked to and associated with that state plan. So right now, we're in the process of the final stages. Next week, the new Unified State Plan will go before the State Workforce Development Board for ratification and approval, and then it'll be posted to the feds by March 2nd. It won't go into effect until July 1. It has been out for public comment, so that information is out there. However, this grant competition will be looking at the 2016-2020 Unified State Plan. You'll also be looking at the local workforce development plans. So the most current ones are already associated and tied to these grants. So if you've been on Iowa Grants already or looked around a little bit, you'll see that each region's local plan has already been posted there. So to make access to that a little bit easier. But you are looking at the current approved plan for that local area. Even though they might still be working on a new plan, you can only look at alignment based on what's already been approved. Application instructions. It's going to be very important that you follow those instructions when you submit the application, when you go through and respond to your questions, because a minimum of 70% of the points is necessary to be eligible for funding. You also need to be familiar with Iowa adult education and literacy policies. In particular, the program standards, instructor standards, content standards, so being familiar with college and career ready English language proficiency standards, 21st century skills, American citizenship standards. Those are all part of what makes adult education function. Okay? So, important information to know. Here's your timeline associated with the grant. We're currently at February 20th. Happy February 20th. March 1st is the first due date, the final due date for any questions related to the grant to be submitted. We'll talk about how those questions can be submitted later on, but that's your first due date. After that, no further questions or clarification can be offered. Those questions need to be directed to myself, as indicated on the cover page of the grant packet. Make sure that in an email you mention that it's for this grant, so that I route it appropriately. Include those questions in the FAQ so that everybody can benefit from what was asked and how was that responded to. Okay? You will not receive an individual response to your question. It'll go into the FAQ, so you'll have to look at the FAQ to read your answer for those questions. The next date after that is April 3rd, is when the applications are due at 4 p.m. April through May will be the review and determination process, and we'll go through what that looks like as well in today's presentation. Announcements will be in June, and we'll try to do it the earliest in June possible so that programs know and are able to plan accordingly for a launch date of July 1st. Those that are familiar with our previous grant cycle, you'll know that we ran a competition for 3 years. This is like one of my least favorite things to do. So I pushed for a 5-year grant cycle, and the feds were fine with that as long as we have the documentation to show. But in saying that, it's a 5-year grant cycle. It's all based upon your performance. So if you're in that grant cycle and your performance does not meet what those standards are for that, it might not go on for 5 years for that program. But the grant cycle is for 5 years. We won't be running another competition until 2025. I wanted longer. I could have gone longer, but one more year. I did it just for you, so that you could do it one more time. Okay, for background and purposes, we provided a little bit of, we have a question?
Do we have access to this PowerPoint?
Absolutely. So after the 25th, this will be posted. I just finished last night, so I need to run it through 508 compliance before we post it and things like that. So it'll also be with the recording for the Zoom. So if you're watching the Zoom, you'll have access to the slides. So we're just going to go through a little bit about the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. I think that I already covered that the 4 titles that are associated with it. This is our current legislation that we have. Its goal is to look at job and career pathways for those that are in need. Believe it or not, it's due for reauthorization already. So I wish that would happen, but this is the law that we follow for adult education. Adult education is covered in Chapter 2. However, a lot of the work that we also do is in Title I when it comes to our performance and accountability, as well as when it comes to our work with the local workforce development boards, the local workforce development areas, and how that alignment needs to occur. Okay. I think that I've covered a little bit about the purpose around Adult Education and Family Literacy Act. In addition to WIOA, we do have final rules related to this, and those are found in Chapter 35, Chapter 34. This was the first time that they actually wrote rules related to adult education. So it is a good resource to help explain a little bit more what the law means. We are looking at serving adults to become literate, obtain the knowledge and skills necessary for employment and self-sufficiency. We are looking at parents and families. I know that it's often hard, and in our application, there's not a lot of language that I could pull that talks about the parents and family work. And that still, though, is one of our purposes for adult education. And I don't want that to get lost in the measurable performance that we have that's looking at employment in the second quarter, employment in the fourth quarter, our median wage. One of our still purposes does exist, that we do serve families and improving those skills. I know that I can't stress that enough, but I can't make it a requirement in your application. And we'll go through that a little bit later about what's required in your application and what's an allowable activity. We do have a note that in the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act that there's more language there for serving those with English language literacy needs, and that's part of a required element in our grant as well, that those services extend to all ranges of a program. We will not fund a program that is only serving adult secondary education, those that are at ABE levels 5 and 6. We will not fund a program that just does English language acquisition. We need to fund programs that serve all individuals that walk into our doors at every level of adult basic education and ESL need. I've included a slide here related to the Unified State Plan so that you're familiar with the language that's around their vision and to their goals related to that, because that directly relates to what required elements of services that Title II is going to need to provide. So we are looking at a lot of language that relates to creating a seamless pipeline of services, making sure that what we're connecting with work that's being done with sector partnerships and career pathways and adult education is accessible to those that we serve. So with the goals and with the visions related to the Unified State Plan, we have made the requirement that integrated education and training is a element that providers need to offer. What that looks like will vary based upon your region, your demand, your needs. However, that's a required element of your application, is to look at how can you and how are you able to provide integrated education training as a service within your program. Yes?
Can we assume that could be IELTE?
You cannot assume that will be IELTE, and we'll talk about the differences between what that IELTE is. If you are doing IELTE as Section 243, then yes, you can. But if you're doing IELTE under 231, IET is not a required element of that. So I can't guarantee that because you're doing IELTE with 231 that you have an IET. So there's a difference there. And we'll talk about that when we get to the activities of an adult education provider. Sorry. Determining applicant eligibility. There's a requirement within adult education that to be a provider, you need to first declare that you're an eligible applicant. And there's two steps in that process. One is whether or not you identify as one of the potential providers on a rather long list, not exhaustive list of what that is, and then you're able to demonstrate effectiveness. So that's a required element, and we'll talk a little bit more, and we'll review how that is. If you can't pass that bump of a screening, then you wouldn't be considered beyond that. So this is really a deciding factor that it's very important that our programs who are applying for this are able to demonstrate that. Okay. So in your grant application, you see that this is Section 1 that's defined for the grant. This is the first part. It includes contact information and an eligibility form. It requires that if, as I mentioned, if you don't pass this stage, then you're determined ineligible for the grant and will not be considered for Part 2 or Part 3 of your application. So that's why some time should be spent making sure that you've completed this as best as possible. An organization is going to be required to present 2 years worth of data related to their performance to show that they're able to serve the target population that we're talking about. You're also required to provide us contact information related to who's your authorized signature, who's going to be your grant manager, your program coordinator, who's going to be your fiscal agent, your fiscal contact, and what does your organization look like to connect all those players that you've identified in your grant. So an organizational chart needs to be included with that, so we can see the lines of authority between who's signing off on this, who's doing the work, and who's handling the finances. So that's part of the contact information that needs to be included. So as you can see, there's a long list of potential applicants for this. So if your entity is listed there, it is possible that consortiums can apply for this grant application. A consortium, doesn't matter how many members are in that consortium, each member would need to submit their own eligible application for this. Each consortium member would need to demonstrate effectiveness in being able to serve individuals. A consortium can't have a membership where this organization has demonstrated effectiveness, this organization does not. That would be deemed ineligible. Each one is assessed based on their own individual merits. Okay, past effectiveness. We're talking about two areas there. We're talking about the ability to demonstrate that you've served those that lack basic skills, have English language acquisition needs, that you provided instruction in the content areas of reading, writing, and math. Furthermore, you also have to provide documentation that participants have moved on to employment, that they've attained secondary school diplomas, and that they've transitioned to post-secondary education. This is an area where last competition that I ran, I knew that this would be a hard area for programs to be able to provide information on. And I thought that the state had the authority to say, well, I need this, but this isn't as high of a priority. I was corrected. I need all of this to determine whether or not you're an eligible applicant. This can be provided to us in two different ways. You have a table 1 that if you are an adult education provider in the past, you'd be able to fill this information out. You would have this information listed as an EFL. So based upon your data, you would be able to say, okay, we served AB1, we served AB2, and this is how many we served in year 1, and this is how many we served in year 2. There's also a table 2 for those that haven't served adult education, might not have classified them as AB1, ESL1. So there's a data table for them to use as well, where they're able to group them by domain that they've taught. So if they've taught English, if they've taught math, they'd be able to group participants that they served in that way. Table 1 and Table 2 are part of your Appendix C. So in your grant packet, Appendix C is the eligibility provider form. That's the one that needs to be completed, uploaded, and saved in Iowa Grants and part of your submission. This is a screenshot of Iowa Grants. So I've tried to incorporate Iowa Grants into today's presentation so that it's not a shocker between, well, what am I looking at here? This is a grant packet. Okay, when I go to look at what's in Iowa Grants, it looks like this. Doesn't always match up. So I've tried to match it up as close as possible. So this is just a screenshot of Section 1 in Iowa Grants. This is asking for your eligibility to submit. This is where you would upload Appendix C. This is where you would indicate in this first section whether or not you're seeking 231 funds and 225 funds and what that budget will be. There's a separate budget form, and we're covering that after your break for lunch. But this would give, from page 1, we'd be able to see what is your application going to be about? This also includes your contact information that we talked about and a place for you to upload your organization chart. We do ask that you save these as a PDF. That way it's secure. You've saved it, it's loaded here. It can't get edited here. It just gets printed off as a PDF. So if your organization chart is 3 different organizations that you have to merge into one, just upload it as one PDF and you'll be okay. Same if it's a consortium and you have to do several different Appendixes C, upload it as one Appendix C document. Okay. Questions? Okay. Yeah, you can. You also have in your grant packet, and again, I'll cover this later, Appendix A, county breakdown. So looking at those areas that you plan to serve by county, that gives you a rough estimate of what that allocation would be. It does give you the opportunity to say, okay, this is the county breakoff, and this is how much we plan to also serve with 225 of that total amount. So again, that's what we'd be looking at in your budget form to say, okay, they said they're going to serve this much out of 231, if this is their budgeted amount, that matches what they submitted in their budget forms. This is how much they said they were going to serve with 225, and that matches. So. How are we doing? I'm actually getting through this really quick. I told someone that I had 80 slides, and they're like, oh my gosh, we're going to be here all day. But as you can see, I'm up to 23. I could go through this, but it's not about me. It's about making sure that the information to you is clear enough that we don't get 50 questions later after today. So if I can address the questions now, it's going to save you time and make sure that you're working on what you need to in the grant. So if we need to slow down, I'm okay. I can also speed up. I mean, it's just a dial for me.
I just have a quick question.
I learned I have to do a grant application that's due next week on the 25th, so I've got working on that. Yes, ma'am.
So if I understood correctly, we need to submit a table 1 or table 2
Correct.
as a PDF.
Just one of those. So you look at your data and you say, look, we've got all the information that we need to submit for table 1.
For
So,
2 years? Past
2 years. Yep.
So that would be
2018, 2019. Okay, I can't stress this section strongly enough. I've talked to other states that they were shocked when some of their stronger performers that had been currently funded just failed to fill in the data on the table. And they had no choice, but they were out of the competition. So be careful in your application, review it. If you have questions about the data, you know that Lisa and Dan's on borrowed time, but Lisa, Dan's going to be out for maternity for a little while, so borrowed time. Sorry. I didn't mean it that way.
We all just died a little bit.
Bad time. It's a great time. Never mind. I'll delete this part of the recording. Well, Eligible services and allowable activities. So we're starting to get into the meat of your application, where you're describing what it is that you plan as a provider to offer services in. It's, again, critical, and I've shared with you already, that alignment to your regional needs is important. It's also critical that you're also addressing that you're a comprehensive site for services as identified by the state. So, and I think another slide or two, I've identified what those services need to be. Doesn't mean that the allowable services can also be provided. We've talked a little bit about the target population. So your application needs to ensure that you're able to address this need. One of the first things that you're going to be working on in your application is, what is your regional need? How many of these participants are in the proposed area that you're serving? What does that need look like? Where are they at? How are you going to access them? How are they going to access you? How are your services going to be provided? I don't have a lot of slides in here, but we do have a lot of references in the application process about integrating technology, about the need for distance education, about workplace and work site education. So we know that in today's economy that this target population is where? Right, Jen? They're working. Yeah. So they're not seeing as much value in going back to school because they're already making $15 an hour, and they're maybe working 2 shifts or things. So how do we make sure that our enrollment doesn't slide because of that, but also that their forward mobility in education isn't hampered when those jobs might disappear or go away, or they want to move up, they're ready to move up, their family expands, their financial circumstances changes, they need to be able to earn more. So how are your programs providing that access? Access is a big thing in the competition, both physical access as well as programmatic access. So as you explain that, you need to be very clear on what you're proposing in your application. Okay, anything that has an asterisk behind it is a required activity. So I think that I've already mentioned that adult basic education, adult secondary education, English language acquisition, the ability to provide services to anyone that's on ABE 1 through 6, ESL 1 through 6 is a required component for a provider. We also require that workforce preparation activities be offered. We've said for a long time that that needs to be braided into the instruction that you're providing with math, the instruction that you're providing with reading. So workforce preparation activities, that should be that's part of your lesson plan. So that should be already braided in there. So I don't know why I need to asterisk it, but it's asterisked. We've also talked about the integrated education and training being a requirement because of what we talk about in the Unified State Plan. You have the sector partnerships that are developing those pathways, the career pathways that exist, and the delivery and the on-roading to those pathways are and can be achieved through integrated education and training. So if we're not providing those, we're not getting our participants onto pathways that lead to sectors that lead to high-demand jobs, careers, opportunities. So IETs is a required element. Family literacy and integrated English literacy and civics education activity are not required unless so by your local workforce development plan. If your plan says, hey, we have a lot of families, a lot of parents who need family literacy, we've identified that as a high need. We also need more IELTE activities because we have a high need for citizenship. That's a need, and that's identified in your plan. Then that becomes a required activity for your application. And should be stated as in your application for that purpose. You should be able to draw that link between that plan and the services that you're providing. Okay? And I go through each one of those activities really quickly, just as a refresher of what those look like. I also talk about 225 because we're talking about 225 and 231 today. So 225 is correctional education, and services within correctional education has a few other activities that are associated with that. So if you are doing corrections education or plan to provide that as a service, and we've got a slide that we talk about, well, what does that look like and where are those services being provided? We are saying that the required activities for serving correctional education is adult basic and secondary education, special education, secondary school credit, and integrated education and training. We're saying that the opportunities and access to IETs should be included for those that are in correctional settings. Allowable activities involve career pathways, concurrent enrollment, peer tutoring, and transition to reentry initiatives. For some of your programs, that's a higher priority. They have a higher need for that. That's identified in your local workforce development plan as a required activity. And as so, then it should be included in your application as well. Some of this starts to give you food for thoughts on what to put in future local workforce development plans, doesn't it? You're like, my plan doesn't include anything about that. Well, this is, again, an opportunity to make sure that those needs are being addressed, and how best to address those needs is including it in the plan. So we just talked a little bit about adult basic education. This is instruction for those that are grade 0 to 8.9. We also require that, again, this is related to content standards, so CCRS, 21st century skills. Those are required components of what we teach for those that are at ABE levels. Adult secondary education, those at grade points 9 to 12. Those that are in NRS or the EFLs as levels 5 and 6. English language acquisition. There's, again, added elements related to WIOA for those that we serve with English language acquisition. It's not just to become proficient in reading and writing and listening. It's required that we're preparing them to transition successfully to post-secondary education, training, or employment. So the services that we're doing isn't just how to read better, it's how is this related to their next step on their journey. What is that next step, and how do we provide the services to get them there? And for this, we use English language proficiency standards, and we also use those adult citizenship standards.
Alex, I'm not familiar with those
Which one?
standards.
They're linked on the department website. They're also the ones that are put out by, so the coordinator handbook has them linked as well. Which government agency is it that does the citizenship? Yeah, I always get USIC something in there. So UCIS, yes. That's the organization that's published that. They also have some great lesson plans, resources for that. But they have the standards related to citizenship. It's also in preparation for taking that test. Okay. Workforce preparation. I made sure that we know that this includes digital literacy. For a long time, trying to teach computer basic skills under WIA, we were told that that's not an activity that's allowed. It very much is something that's allowed and necessary as we look at workforce preparation activities, as we look at 21st century skills. So what are we doing to cover that, and how are we doing that? Maybe not as a standalone, but something that's occurring concurrently. We've talked about integrated education and training. This is what's being done concurrently with adult basic education or adult secondary education or ELA with workforce preparation and workforce training. That's aligned to a career pathway that is contextualized, concurrent. So this is the activity that has all of these elements in it, and a participant is able to achieve a credential that is work ready, that is industry recognized. That workforce training could look a lot of different ways. The list that's provided here for what qualifies as workforce training includes occupational skill training on the job, programs that combine workforce training and related instruction, transitional skill upgrading and retraining. So there's a lot of different workforce training elements. Family literacy. Again, if your plan so decides that this is a required element, then include it. And these are the guidelines related to it. It's interactive with children and parents. It's intended to bridge that multi-generational area where children might need that assistance in school and they're not receiving it from their parents. We know that there's a direct linkage between the skill set that children have related to how far their parents have gone on for education. So this is unfortunately an area that WIOA in its performance measures doesn't really account for. However, it is an allowable activity. And the IELCE activity under 231. This is the ability to address English language, to also work on citizenship, responsibility, civic participation, and may include workforce training. We see that it's a benefit to include workforce training. We see that if you're already combining a lot of things in IELCE, that including them to have access to the IET without an additional barrier is logical and makes sense. However, under 231, it's not a requirement that they go on and do the workforce training. So there's a distinction there between funding sources being used for IELCE and what's required. This afternoon, we'll be talking about Section 243 funds, the IELCE funds for that. It is a separate competition. Those funds are being distributed separately and differently than the 231 funds. So. Questions about those activities? Right. That's one of the questions I'll write down, and I'll prepare in the FAQ. So does the family literacy need to include children on site as part of their activity? Is that?
Right.
Okay.
It has to be direct instruction or.
Right.
Or indirect.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Other questions about activities? So again, as you're describing your activities, this is what you're connecting your activities to your budget. You're saying, I need to do adult education and I have this need. There's 20,000 in our area that we propose serving that lack skill levels at this grade level. Therefore, that's going to require 10 teachers, 5 full-time, 5 part-time. So all of this needs to relate back to the activities that you're proposing to provide and offer. So that connection needs to be there in your grant application. If we can't see the connection between the activities, what you're proposing to do, who you're serving because there's a need, and your budget, then you've kind of missed an opportunity to help draw that line, and probably will lose some points in that process. Okay.
The maximum award though would be based on what those numbers are reflected in the table by county.
That's what you build your proposed budget on. There could be some negotiations after that and review of that. So that's not a guarantee that how much I'm asking for will be how much I'm awarded. But that's what you can look at to frame your proposal. Okay. Proposal submission requirements. I've included this in and a few other notes in your application, in your grant packet, to highlight that this is intended to still keep the innovation in WIOA. We are looking for those applicants that, yes, are you doing these activities, but we're also looking at how are you being innovative in your delivery of those activities. Are you considering IET to be only an activity for those that are at your highest level? Or is it something that anyone who walks through the door might have a potential to participate in? Are we looking that adult learners can learn anytime, anywhere, and at their own pace? How are those programs looking to be adaptive enough to the needs, but also having those other elements within their program and delivery? So these were included as thinking part, as elements to maybe spark that, well, this is what we're thinking that we want with our programs. Because, you know, it's not enough. We already talked that a number of our participants, our target population, is at jobs. So what does our partnerships with businesses look like? How are we reaching out to employers to connect with them, our services, so that those students don't have to leave work or don't have to stay up another 8 hours to wait for a class to start? So what is it that we're able to offer in partnerships or in tandem with where our students are at? In your application, we are asking you to be brief. There is plenty of room to add comments. The terms and the text areas are all standardized, so you will find that Each narrative response is limited to 5,000 characters. That's between 500 to 1,000 words. It depends on how big your words are. So it is standardized, but we are also looking for attachments as PDF. There's not room for additional attachments. So if you can't fit within the narrative and you want to attach another document, it won't be considered part of the application. So you have to be able to fit your response in to Iowa grants in the narrative, and you have to attach the documents that we're asking for, the appendixes that's related to that question, and not tack on, oh, by the way, here's the rest of the response to this question that goes on for another 10 pages. Those additional pages will not be considered part of the application. I don't think you want to do another 10 pages anyway, do you? No. And I'm pretty sure our reviewers don't want to go through another 10 pages. Okay, there's two things that were used to align the questions that you are asked in your grant packet. The first being Section 231 of WIOA. There's 13 considerations. So if you look at starting on page 13 of your grant packet, they list those 13 considerations. So you'll find all 13 of those considerations in your questions. And I've labeled them this time so you can clearly see that this question is being driven from a WIOA required element. You're also being asked questions that relate to adult education's program standards. So the program standards are these 6 elements that programs will also be monitored based on. So you'll notice that in Iowa grants, as well as in your grant packet, the questions are framed within those sections of program standards. So program design and leadership, curriculum instruction and professional development, learner progress, accountability, community interaction and outreach, and one-stop system integration. So that's how the questions are framed. That's how the grant packet is designed. Any questions about Eric?
Can you explain that 13 considerations of WIOA and 6 standards, or the 6 standards cover the 13 considerations?
The 6 standards incorporate those 13 considerations, but there's also additional questions related to those standards that you'll find in there. So you'll find all 13 considerations being asked. Some considerations are being asked in multiple standards. So we've got one that's maybe related to how are you serving those with barriers. So we're asking that, directed to that, but it's also asking how are you connected with childcare and how are you working with your one-stop center. So it's asked in another area, but its target is to address that integration component of that consideration. It's okay, ask a question if.
I just said we're halfway through the time.
I know. You slow down. You guys need to ask more questions.
We used a very good crowd.
Well, keep you stunned in silence, so it's probably.
Alex, can you go back to 39 for a second?
To which one?
39.
Sure. So those 6 standards shouldn't be a surprise to you. All of you probably have been involved in a Zoom with Teresa recently to talk about monitoring. So you should be able to say, hey, that's number 5. I know that one. That's right. Community interaction and outreach. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Okay. So this next section, I've kind of broken that out to highlight the 6 narratives that you have in Iowa grants. So those 6 narratives are related to those program standards. So it highlights, again, what are we asking under program design and leadership? What is that really diving into? And how does that relate to not just the considerations, but also the standards and what you're going to be, if successfully, as an applicant, further monitored against. Because again, our efforts are to tie your application to monitoring process for continuous improvement. So that's part of the reason why we use the standards as that framework. Okay. So this is section 2 of the grant application. Section 1 was contact information and eligibility provider. Section 2 is the narratives related to your proposed project. I've included the point value for each one of these narratives. So it's divided into 6 narratives with a 7th being optional if your program is choosing to do correctional and institutional services. So all you have to do is get through 6 narratives and you're done, right? 3 things: contact information eligibility, proposed project, and your cost proposal. That's it. 3 things. But this part is broken into 6 narratives, okay? Again, related to the standards. Program design and leadership. We're looking at regional needs. We need to know, why are you going to be selecting these activities? What data is driving your decision? What data is driving how many instructors you say you need for English language, because it's based on, this is the data, this is the areas that we're serving. Ashley.
Can you give us some guidance on, not like in terms of determining how many instructors, but like when we are asked to, describe the population in our service area or the education levels, or like what are sources of information that you would consider relevant for, and you want the data to be recent, so,
Right.
Like a 2006 census bureau is not recent, so can you give us some guidance on where we best find that information?
Okay. We'll start with 2. You can always start with the ACS data, American Community Survey, and that can be as recent as 2017, 2018. They also have it for 1 year, 4 years, rolling averages, and you can identify by education. You can identify by, again, the counties that you're proposing to serve in. They have limited data available on those that are not sufficient in English, but it is there. You can also look at household median wage from ACS. So I share those grant writers in the room. That's a bookmark page for them. They know how to find that. They know where to go. So ACS is a source that will give you a broad overview. If you want to go deeper with that, and I encourage you to look at that, would be with your workforce development partners. So starting to look at labor shed information, starting to look at unemployment, employment numbers, starting to look at education services that they provide. That would give you, again, based upon your region and your local workforce development area or board, you have a great resource with that. They do regional labor shed studies. They also have data related to that. If you are serving those with corrections or institutional service, The Department of Corrections has a great resource there that displays how many are released, how many are incarcerated. So you would have information there to use for your reentry services, as well as for your services of those that are at facilities. You can sort and divide that out by facilities as well. And that's monthly, it's updated monthly, so that information's there. So that's just a little bit of what's available. There's some other resources. United Way does a great ALICE report, and that helps to identify those with barriers to employment that they serve. So single parents, homeless, information is on there. Low income is on the ALICE report. So United Way is a great resource for that, for data. So each area has maybe a United Way center, service area that you have. We have one here in Central Iowa that covers Polk County and Story. So that's a great resource that I would turn to. Does that help? Does anyone else have other suggestions that they use as maybe grant writers or things that you've come across that has been really helpful in determining data when you want to? Where's our people? Where's our population at? No? Okay. Sure. So, related to program design and leadership, we have already mentioned that physical accessibility is a critical component of that. So if you're proposing to offer services at locations with your grant, we want to know that they're ADA compliant. So there's an opportunity for you to upload that information in this grant application. So if you're proposing to provide services and that location is not ADA compliant, and you find that out in preparation to that, that gives you an opportunity to reevaluate, well, where is a good place to provide that service? So this is in partnership with another entity. They should have that information available to you as well. It's a federal requirement. You're using federal funds. This is a request for federal funds. So we need to make sure that that site, that facility is compliant with that. We're also talking about Appendix G and Appendix D related to delivery of your services. That's with your flexible schedule. So you detail out how, when, where you're providing the services at. You also provide your general education attestation that no discrimination occurs. This is something that the feds had added on to the state, and as a result, I have to add it on to my grant application, is that you make sure that you're not discriminating based on race, age, gender, so that information and how you're ensuring that you're not doing that. So appeals process related to that, they're able to disclose if they feel like in any way that they're being not allowed to access services. Yes?
Question on Appendix G that you just mentioned,
Yep.
flexible scheduling. One of the boxes we have to fill out is a key standard learning objectives addressed for each class. How many are you looking for?
It depends on the class. So this is a class that's related to adult basic education. So is this going to be math? Is this going to be reading? Is it going to be all of that? So at least one standard from each of those domains. If it's just going to be math, I mean, maybe a couple, because you're targeting a specific. This is a math class that's going to be covering levels 3 and 4. So I know that we're going to cover these domains. So it gives us a sense of what's going to be covered within that class. If it's an IET that you're saying this is going to be an IET activity, then you'll want to cover at least an element that demonstrates the adult basic education component, the workplace education, and something relative to what's going to be covered with the workforce training again, that's an indicator then that we know that a single set of learning objectives is occurring for that IEP. I don't need the whole, right? Good question. Good question. But we want to know, again, that there's a tie between what's being offered and the content standards that we're asking for.
Alex, I have another question about that appendix G.
Yeah.
I know you don't have it in front of you, but I do.
What are you talking about? I got it memorized. I can see it right now.
Does something need to be marked in every single one of these columns? Because there's one that says software directed or teacher lead. Isn't a hybrid class people?
I think there's a column there for hybrid as well, isn't there?
Don't mark anything like software directed?
Well, I think, what's that? There's a face, yeah, there's a hybrid column, I thought. Yeah, so again,
They should have linked it. Hybrid class people. Well, this is.
yeah, but there's going to be,
Yeah, this is G.
you'll know if it's being directed by software or not.
Yeah,
Hybrid?
yeah.
If it's a hybrid, I would say that it's still.
Yeah, exactly.
Say that because they're driving what it is that you're doing on the business education platform, what it is that you're going to be covering there. It's not, oh, there's 5 modules and go at it. A hybrid's not that. A hybrid's not that. Yep.
So if we're operating option 2, we have several high school level courses. Each individual one of those courses you listed here. Or option 2 for HSE.
For option 2,
HSE for credit. Okay, several math courses, several language arts, several science, electives. Each one of those individual courses you listed here.
Alex, could you repeat that question? I couldn't hear that very well.
yeah, just a second. The question was, if you're doing option 2 and you've got several different math courses, does each course need to be listed out on Appendix G when you're doing option, we're not calling it option 2 anymore. HSED by credit. You're going to get me in trouble. So that's a good question, and I'll write that one down, okay? Because again, the HSED by credit is a separate application, not necessarily tied to AEFLA. If you were doing a HSED by credit and you had math as your topic, could that be one course name as HSED by credit math, and or does it need to be separated out by that? Because again, you're targeting certain course level, right? You're targeting one course level of participants for that HSED by credit. So if it could be grouped into one course.
Like I have an algebra 1 class, I have a geometry class, I have fundamental math, and experience, and each individual one needs to be listed.
I'm thinking it doesn't, only because I think that there would be a way that if you think about it, that that course name could be HSED by credit math, and you could cover all of that information grouped together. It's just like if you were doing ABE math. I mean, you're going to be covering a lot of math to get them up to 9th grade, right? But we're not listing out you're not doing the number line, you're not doing whole numbers, you're not doing all of the lesson plans necessarily, so I almost think that that list is closer to what lesson plans would be labeling out. So I think that there's a way that if you look at grouping that as, because again, it comes down to what is that course level addressing? I mean, you're addressing the ABE 5 and 6, right? So that would be 1 rather than, does that help?
Yes.
Thank you. I didn't have that. Look at it. Martha?
2 questions. The first one on appendix G. One course then could mark multiple columns. For example, if we have an IEP course that is blended learning, we have managed enrollment, it's teacher-led, but we also have a distance-ed or a hybrid. Or is one course only going to land in one of these?
Now, as you go across the different columns, you would indicate a response to each of the columns as it related. So your IET, managed enrollment, also teacher-led, so you would mark that as you go across for that. So with your IET, it would be one course, because an IET is one course, right? Single set of learning objectives. So I wouldn't expect to see any IETs being, this is IET part A, this is IET part B. It would be one entry, one row, but it could have multiple indicators in each of the columns in response to how it's being led.
The second part of the question, if we have a math class that has the same or very similar objectives, but is offered in different sites with different instructors, they're listed separately.
Different.
Do you have an instructor name?
I have, do I also have a location?
Yes.
Yeah, it would be a different location.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. We also have Appendix L, personnel list and qualifications. So that would be uploaded as well. Narrative 1. Trust me, as I was doing this, I noticed a trend. I seemed to try to get a lot of stuff in narrative 1 and 2. So by the time I got to 6, it was a breeze. So just keep that in mind as you're preparing this. It'll seem heavy at first, but it gets a lot. Just a thought. Yes, Laura?
Just backing up slightly to the personnel list here first, where it says that we're only to include personnel relative to this grant application, are those only people paid by federal funds, or do we also include those paid by state money, for example?
So if you're right, so if they're relative to this grant, either being funded through this grant or their match dollars are being included in this grant, they would all be included in your personnel list.
Which state dollars are matched up?
State dollars are your match dollars, so anyone that's being funded, anyone that's going to be supporting this grant. So if you're funding a teacher to do 10% as part of the IET thing, you would want to include them as that as well. Yeah. So anything that's associated with this grant for match purposes is part of this grant application. Okay, curriculum instruction and professional development. And you'll also see that the point value is heavier with these first ones because the content is more, the burden is more. So this section's worth 150 points. You have a fewer attachments related to it. Questions, though, are centered around evidence-based instruction, integrating technology, contextualized and integrated education, and that has Appendix J associated with that. And we also have access and high-quality professional development. And that's relative to Chapter 23 and the requirements associated with ensuring that staff has access to professional development, that they're meeting the requirements of doing an individual development plan, having the required hours of PD every year. So I think I might have missed a attachment related to that. We are asking for programs to upload prior professional development activities for the past 2 years so that we can see what is it that a program might have provided for instructional staff in the area of professional development. So we're asking for for programs prior 2 years of professional development activities. And these are centered more on, as you as a provider, what have you done to support your instructional staff that's working on grant like this for PD?
Or are these only ones that you provided? Or programs that you provided?
There should be, I mean, more of what you've done than maybe of what the state has done. There should be evidence of that your involvement and your investment in PD is clear in that listing of activities. If it's something that, well, you know, we've done everything that the state asked us to do, because, you know, the state's just mean. And we've listed that, and we haven't had time to do any of our own. I don't believe that that's the case, but I'd be a little concerned if that's all the evidence that you had was just what we've done. Because you've got needs, your instructors have needs, and I know we haven't been able to maybe fully address. So we should see evidence of other activities.
So that can include links and COAs and
It could.
all those things. Honestly, be, staff development.
It could be staff development.
That include just regular staff meetings, or is that outside the box?
Professional development activities. I don't know what your staff meetings are like. I don't know if there's a professional development element to those staff meetings, but if it's just to go through administrative things, it's just to discuss scheduling, facilities, that's not a professional development activity. But if yours is inclusive of that, and there's evidence of that, I mean.
Within the agenda that there's talk about STAR or whatever.
Talking about STAR and talking about scheduling STAR is different than, this is a training on STAR, right?
So for this, as areas you would like to see, like sign-in sheets or exactly what it covers with the staff development day?
That would be included in your narrative. So in the actual attachment, for, I don't know if I can remember the appendix for it. Okay, thank you. Appendix K, it's not asking for evidence, it's asking for a listing.
So for appendix K is asking for personnel list and qualifications.
Okay,
Appendix J is asking for prior professional development activities. Am I in the, okay, I'm sorry.
Depending on where you print it out, Appendix J has the same content as Appendix L. I did not bring the one that had but the form was the same when I was looking.
Yeah.
well, you're in 243, we're not talking about 243.
Oh, sorry, it's this one. This is the one. I have both of them here. Okay, J is, I think this is the one that's correct.
IET.
Yeah, J is IET.
And that's personnel.
Right. But the
attachment files within iowgrants.gov, when you look at the individual, like this is attachment J, has the same content as attachment L. We're talking about 231, right?
We're talking about 231, and we're talking about, the attachment related to professional development
That's
activities.
appendix K.
Yes, appendix K, that one. But your question was, does
So
appendix,
if you go to iowgrants.gov and at the very bottom of like the first page of the grant, there's all those links to all of the external documents.
okay,
You can download like the Excel version of each attachment. Attachment J has the same content as attachment L, or it
okay.
did yesterday when I
You're
was
saying
looking at.
appendix J and L are
Are
the same?
But if you go to like your,
The grant
the
application.
grant
itself.
application is correct.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for the comment, I've recorded it.
Okay.
We'll look at that. So appendix K is the professional development activity, and in that it's just listing, it's looking for a list of those activities that you've done in the last 2 years. What you provide in the narrative related to, prior professional development is where you can explain, what those activities related to, how they supported your program, how they led to better achievements, continuous improvement. That's where you'll be able to say, this type of professional development, be it STAR or be it something else, had a positive impact on our program. Okay. Narrative 3, learner progress. We're looking for the, again, we're talking about access, and we're talking about access in the way that a participant would access the services. So we're looking at program access now, not the physical accessibility that we were looking in narrative 1. This is, we want to see the participant experience model. So as you open up that, that page in Iowa Grants, you'll see that the participant experience model that's in the coordinator handbook is shared there. We want to know how you're proposing to serve students from when they walk into your center, when they walk through your doors. What does that look like? How is orientation? How is intake? How are classes assigned to that individual? How do they access those classes? How does counseling help? When are they connected to a career pathway? How are they connected to remedial help if they're struggling with a class? How do they show that they're done and they're ready for the next stage? How do they exit your program? So you're walking through that experience for a learner. What is that process for the learner? From when they first walk through your door to receiving services to leaving your program. What does that look like? And how do they access those? What are the resources available to them if they have barriers? If they're a student that has a disability, what services are available to them? If they have issues with transportation, childcare, how are those services available to them to assist with that? What is your program proposing to do to make accessing your program, your activities, your services as seamless and as easy as possible to achieve success? What does success look like for that student? So I told you it gets easier as we move through the narratives. Accountability. We've got 3 areas of accountability that we look at. We look at performance and outcomes. We look at management information systems, so the data that you're putting in. We also look at fiscal management. You're going to notice that there's some more stronger language related to fiscal management. We need to know that you as a provider are financially viable, that you're not at risk of not being able to meet your match requirements, that you're not at risk of not being able to fulfill the contract duties. So associated with that, there's additional attachments that need to be uploaded to demonstrate that. Profit loss audits, most recent audits would serve in those purposes. So if you're an institution, you should have access to that information. Or if you're not sure how to access that information, this might be an area that you would want to get a lead on in trying to pull that together.
How recent for the balance sheet?
I'd have to look. I think that I indicated on there how recent that is. So probably within the last 2 years. Okay, performance and outcomes. It talks about how your program is going to be able to meet the post-test rate, how your program is going to contribute to the state benchmarks for each of the EFLs. And then both for the data accountability, there's assurances related to that, as well as for the fiscal. There's assurances related to that, and you indicate yes or no to your agreements for that. So if there's someone that needs to review that before you mark yes, make sure that that happens. Okay, community interaction and outreach. This is where we talk about your partnerships. While there's not an appendix to this, there is a requirement that letters of support for a entity that you are working with in each of the counties that you propose to provide services is included, is uploaded. Either a memorandum of understanding or a letter of support, and that could be from, again, United Way, it could be from another entity that you're working with in partnership, it could be a library, it could be a business that in that county that you're proposing to serve, that you have a partnership with. So we're looking at what is your community engagement, how are you providing outreach? What does that look like for you? You might have more than one example. Again, combine those into one PDF and upload it.
Could it be an agency that you're in collaboration with, for example, they share a building with the Iowa State Extension in one county?
This would be, are you sharing services or just sharing physical space with? So probably how you're engaged with them. You're looking for more an engagement with a partner. So
Trying to promote each other's services, would that be engagement?
if that's what you have, I'm not scoring or rating your response. I'm just, I mean, if that's what you have, we're looking for your partnerships, your letters of support, memorandum of understanding that you might have with those within the community. And if you're saying that we're going to serve five counties, we're looking for 5 partnerships at minimum that you have letters of support from. And if that's one that you feel this demonstrates that support, then that's what you would upload. Did that answer your question, Laura? Or? Okay.
If there is a county within our region that we don't currently have any class sites, we will not bother with that county, or
are you proposing to offer services in that county? Does that county, or is included in your proposal?
Well, what do you mean by offering services? If there's not a class site there, I would say no, but they can always go to another site.
So, I think it's, still at the beginning of the application process. It's either the first or second form that you'll, fill out in your application. You're identifying what areas that you're offering services. And, if you're saying, well, so I cover all of these counties, that's true? I mean, are you providing services in all of those counties? Are you providing services in?
College though, but
I'm looking for adult education. I mean, if I'm falsely saying that Iowa, we provide adult education in 99 counties, and the truth is, we provide adult education in 90 counties. I need to know that. I need to know that there might be a gap in our service somewhere.
and there's access to an online program or class.
Are you providing that in that county, and how is that being promoted in that county? What partnership then do you have in that county, maybe in the library or the county seat or some type of chamber that you might be involved in with employers that online service is being offered, or that distance education element is being offered? So again, when you're looking at your application, you want to make sure that you're identifying where are we serving, and are we truly serving in those areas? Because again, you're going to be accountable for that, right? I mean, at some point, the state will say, okay, you said that you're serving these counties. What services have you done in those counties? But, I mean, you just want to.
This is important to clarify, because in the past, at the very beginning of the application, I would always list the counties that were in, and I actually did, because that's what I thought it was supposed to do.
And maybe that is the right answer. But are you looking at providing services in all of those counties in some way or capacity? So as you work through the application, you might find, hey, we do online, we are partnered with them. I don't have a physical space in that county, but I still feel like we're getting enrollment from that county. I still feel like they're coming to this location, and this is how we're providing services in that county. Because at some point, there will be questions about, hey, you said that you're covering 5 counties. What are you doing for that county? And you want to make sure that, I mean, if I'm putting that in the application, I wanted my monitoring to be able to be held accountable and show that I am serving that county. If it's something that, we just don't have the numbers in that county, you're showing that in your narrative too. You're showing that, okay, these are the counties within our community college that has a need. Even though our community college serves 2 other counties, there just is not a documented need for adult education. So we're focusing our efforts on these 4 counties. And this is what we're doing in those 4 counties. So last thing we want to, not the last thing we want to see, but we just want to be careful that if we're looking at an application and we're funding a program and you're saying that you're providing services in 6 counties, we don't want a year down the road saying, oh, well, yeah, I said 6, but really I'm only doing 4. Does that make sense? But again, if you really are serving those other 2 counties, they're being pulled into this service center that's here right on the border between these 2 counties. Maybe you don't have a center there, but you've got a resource, information's getting out to those counties, students are signing up from those counties, there's still a documented need in those counties, then who's your partner? How are you providing that service in that county even if you don't have not saying you have to have a physical location in every county. Does that help?
Can a department within our college that has a presence in that county that is making referrals to us? Like, I might not have a classroom there, I might not have an instructor there, but the college has a presence there. Students are coming to that place and being referred to us through that department of the college. And then they're coming to a physical AEFLA, enrolling, and then doing online. I mean, is that a partnership that we can count here?
It's a partner, you can't count it as a partnership because it's your own entity.
Right.
What's that?
Community
Oh, yeah, it can be included in your narrative that you have this referral process, that you as an entity are making these referrals.
But I can't get a letter from
But
that
it wouldn't be a
department.
letter from that department to show that there's a support here, because your college is the
No, I
applicant.
get it,
Your college would be the applicant.
But if I get a general letter of support from the Chamber of Commerce in that community saying,
If there's a letter of support, yeah, if there's a letter of support saying that, hey, we acknowledge that there's a need for adult education, we support that, we're working to make referrals, information available.
all right,
I mean, again, that will be evaluated to the strength of that relationship. In that community partnership will be scored accordingly. Okay. One-stop integration. So there's two elements to this, one-stop system services and then the coordination of one-stop services. We're looking again for what those partnerships look like. The department knows that there's not an active memorandum of understanding, or if there is, that memorandum of understanding between the core partners does not include an infrastructure funding agreement. What does need to be uploaded is any communication, any meetings that occurred or happened related to the discussion of a memorandum of understanding to show that there's evidence of that work or discussion about that work, discussion about shared services related with one-stop partners. Again, the reason for this is to ensure that other entities could include documentation related to that while not having a active, fully enforced, with all the required elements of an MOU in place. So again, we're not asking that of you either. We're asking, show us evidence that discussions related to a new memorandum of understanding with the core partners has happened. And that should be within the last year. Again, because Title II and adult education, we want to make sure that we're leveraging resources with our one-stop partners. We want to make sure that that coordination of services is happening, and that there's a connection there. So there's questions related to that in the application. Told you, as you go through the narratives 1 through 6, 1 and 2 are bears to get through, and then by the time you're just flowing through 3, 4, 5, and 6, right? It's just super easy to just knock those out. Gets you to an optional section here related to corrections and institutionalized services. How many feel that this is an area that they might want to apply for and use funding for? Couple are thinking about it, might be. Wait till you see the set. No,
Way to motivate us.
Yeah, no, just kidding. So, this, under section 225, allows you to provide services in prisons, jail reformatories, detention centers, halfway houses, community-based rehabilitation centers, other areas of, so it's not just limited to federal or state prison. It could be those halfway houses, it could be county jails where you're providing services. And again, the activities related to that are adult basic education, looking at opportunities for IET. Not more than 20% of the federal allocated grant received can be used for correctional education. So you would be awarded 231 funds, and out of those 231 funds, you would identify a portion of that that's going to be used for serving corrections education. And collectively, what's being applied for corrections education can't be more than what the state, no more than 20% of what the state receives. Okay. This section is optional. It's worth 100 points. You need to make sure that you score 70% or more to be able to use Section 225 funds. So even though it's an optional thing, we still want to make sure that the quality is there. We want to make sure that the plan is in place, that the purpose of those funds are being well applied. So we do require some thoughts that goes into the application for that. So related to correctional, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to attach your schedule, Appendix G. We're asking for Appendix Q, which is document, have you done past services to those in correctional settings. It's different to serve those in correctional settings. You have different limitations related to that. Do you have a history of doing that? Or is this your first time and you don't have a history related to that? Who's going to be providing that service? So Appendix L, the personnel list and qualifications. Who's going to be doing that? We're also asking for a section there related to performance accountability with corrections education and an enrollment target. If you're going to do that, and we're setting aside funds specifically for that purpose, what is your target? How many are you planning to serve with those funds in correctional education? Not too hard.
You did say earlier, though, that special education is a required component of corrections. Is that true?
It is true. And that's as needed, and that's identified by age.
Okay.
So once they're over 21, that special education doesn't apply for adult education. But if you're serving anyone that's 18, 19, 20, special education services could be funded from 225. Okay.
And we have to have personnel or
And then include that partnership in your narrative and
get a letter from them.
get a letter from them. Make sure they're from a different county, then yeah. You made it. We made it. I know, we were on such a roll. We were boom, halfway through, and then sorry. So back here at 1 o'clock. We've got fiscal, we've got the review process, what that looks like. We've got the monitoring, once you are funded. We've got a couple elements of Iowa grants to walk through so that you can see what it looks like, of what's going to be required in there, and then questions. So you got an extra 10 minutes because you guys didn't make me have to take a break or anything. It's been great. But you sat for a long time.
I got an email with an Eric reply at lunch, so.
Did you? It's cold outside, so. But, this room is, will be safe if you want to leave your things. We've got this room until after 2.
Are we here for the AEFLA?
Those that are on the call, we're going to, stop the recording and, relog back in at 1 o'clock. So, enjoy your break. I'm going to stop the recording now.